In Walmart's Who Newville, everyone ready their cart. Amazing Black Friday deals are about to start. Online and in the app, such great deals to explore. Everything you love from tech, toys, and more. The days to save and the ones to remember. It's only the 25th to the 30th of November. Set your alarms. Don't miss out. These deals are epic, without a doubt. The Who's are all ready, but are you? Walmart Black Friday deals await. Who knew?
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
For the majority of spies, certainly with Archie, you're in it. There's nothing much you can do. You're so far into it that you just have to get on with it. So you can't afford the luxury of a debate in your mind as to whether the ideology that initially attracted you to the cause that you're spying for was justified or whether it was wrong or whether you were naive being sucked into it. The fact is that you made a decision and you became a spy, and that's it. And you just have to concentrate, because I think a lot of spies would probably say that if they allowed themselves time to think about it, that will be a distraction from just getting on with it, and also ensuring their own safety and their own security.
Welcome to the Spy Masters podcast. My name's Antonia Senior and I'm your host. In this episode, I chat with Alex Gerlis, BBC journalist turned spy writer. Alex has written 12 books which have sold more than 550,000 copies. His previous books have centred around World War II, but in every Spy or Traitor, Alex moves to the 1930s, to a world riven with ideological factionalism. The book follows a British spy and a traitor working for the NVKD at the heart of the British establishment. We talk about the 1930s, about the Cambridge spy ring, and the challenges of writing a series of books with really complex plots. We've got more great guests coming up, so follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on X, formerly known as Twitter, at SpyMastersPod. Right now, I'll hand over to me, talking to the brilliant Alex Gerlis. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Spy Masters podcast. We're very excited to have you here. I massively enjoyed this book, which is the first in a new series, your 12th book, which is quite an achievement. Should we kick off with you just telling us a little bit about this first book in the series and what your overall plan for it is?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Antonia, and good to be on the podcast. This book, as you say, is my 12th, and it's the first in a new series. And the series at the moment is planned as 4 books. So what I had in mind was, having previously, in all but one of my books, they've been exclusively set during the Second World War. One of them kind of went into the Cold War a little bit, jumped through to the 1970s. But essentially, what my thinking was, that I wanted to do something a bit more outside of the confines of 1939 to 1945. There were times when I felt that was relatively short period, actually. When you think about it, it seems as if the Second World War went on forever, but it was just 5-6 years. And sometimes when you're trying to write a series, that's not quite long enough. So I came up with the idea of going over a period of about 20 years with a possibility of an add-on after that. So it starts in 1936. Well, there's one or two flashbacks, but essentially the plot starts in 1936. And the idea is that the series will end in 1956, Budapest, obviously. But there is a possibility it could carry on into the Cold War. So this one, Every Spy, a Traitor, is based around a character called Charles Cooper. He's mainly known as Cooper in the book. And Cooper is a nice chap, kind of young, mid-20s, journalist on a trade magazine. And then he unexpectedly inherits quite a large sum of money from his father's maiden aunt, and his father had been killed in the Great War, which is obviously a thing which hangs over Cooper's life. So he didn't really know about this great aunt, and he certainly didn't know about the money which his mother had tried to keep from him. So he unexpectedly inherits this money, and the elderly solicitor with whom he's dealing said, you can use it to do something that you always wanted to do. And he'd always wanted to travel, and he's always wanted to write, and he'd quite like the idea of writing a novel. So he sets off into Europe, really with a very vague idea of just travelling around a bit and maybe writing a novel. And the writing the novel is there a bit, but not in a very serious way, because he's not terribly serious about it. He just has various ideas. But it's a useful way of getting him into different parts of Europe. And he encounters two things on the travels. He ends up in Switzerland, where he meets a German couple who tell him that if he wants to see what's going on in Europe, he really has to go to Germany, which he does. And they've given him their address in Berlin, and he's welcome to stay with them. And of course, he's absolutely shocked at what he sees, the rise of the Nazis, etc. And by the time he gets to Berlin and meets up with them, they have links with other people, one of whom he meets, who persuades him to go to Moscow. And before he knows it, he's been recruited as an agent in Moscow. So he rather innocently has been dragged into a world that he had absolutely no idea existed or how he got into it. But he is into it. But he thinks he's got a way out of it when he gets back to London, and he's able to quite easily assume a different identity. And he thinks that he's managed to shake off the NKVD, Russian intelligence, but he hasn't really. So the story is around that. It's also around how he's recruited into a branch of British intelligence called the Annex. And then at the same time, there is another story going on, which will run throughout. I mean, Cooper will run throughout the series, but this other story will also run throughout the series, which is a fairly upper-class British character who'd been to Oxford, who's also been recruited as a communist spy, but in a much more serious way, and he becomes a high-level traitor. And the identity of this traitor is hidden throughout the series to be revealed at the very end.
I thought that was very, very clever. So all the way through the novel, this high-level traitor is known by his code name Archie.
Yeah.
And that's, and then there are sort of clues dropped along the way. So I guess presumably over the course of the series and the book, we might run into Archie in his sort of day job characteristic.
Yeah, you've got to be, of course, I have to be very careful. I mean, you could also call the clues red herrings. We do actually get Archie's name in book 2, which I'm writing at the moment, but we don't know it's Archie. So there are a number of characters. So it is kind of narrowed down as to who he is and what he does, but he's only ever referred to as Archie. And I think somewhere in book 4, it might become a bit more evident, but it will certainly become evident at the very end. But, I've got to kind of play with that. So I've got to play with throughout books 1, 2, 3, and most of book 4, I've got to play with the fact that he's Archie, but he's also a character in the main part of the story, and what he does and the conflicts he goes through as well. He is an ideological communist, unlike Cooper, who doesn't know who's not interested in ideology, but rather like a lot of the Cambridge spies who were ideologically motivated. You can call them traitors, which they were, of course, but there was an ideology that was fairly instrumental in their recruitment. And it certainly, as far as they were concerned, it justified everything they did. If you read what Kim Philby said, he didn't have any compunction about what he'd done, and betrayal, and the fact that he caused the death of many British agents. For him, the ideology drove everything. And in the case of Archie, the ideology was certainly there, if not at the beginning.
Although at one point he says, doesn't he, that he doesn't actually like ideologues. Doesn't he say at one point, I don't like ideologues and or Jews or lower class people? And that's which struck me as a very Archie thing. So his own ideology is okay, but in other people it's a bit embarrassing. Is that how it works?
Yeah, and he's a snob. Remember, he is he's an upper class snob with all the prejudices English snob with all the prejudices that brings. So he doesn't really like the Russians very much. He doesn't. There are very few that he likes. But there is a kind of basic kind of ideology or justification that he sees that motivates him. But I also think that there's an issue, Antonia, with a lot of spies that notwithstanding how or why they were recruited, whether it was for money or whether it's for ideology or whether it was because of blackmail, there's a point in which they've been recruited and they're working as an agent and they know you can hardly turn around. Cooper finds this at one stage when he says to himself, he's in a hotel room in Rotterdam, which is where I was a couple of weeks ago. But he's in a hotel room in Rotterdam thinking, well, what's he meant to do when he gets back to Britain? Does he turn up at a police station and say, I kind of have a confession? Or do you just go on with it? Well, in Cooper's case, it was a bit different. But for the majority of spies, certainly with Archie, you're in it. There's nothing much you can do. You're so far into it that you just have to get on with it. So you can't afford the luxury of a debate in your mind as to whether the ideology that initially attracted you to the cause that you're spying for was justified or whether it was wrong or whether you were naive being sucked into it. The fact is that you made a decision and you became a spy and that's it. And you just have to concentrate, because I think a lot of spies would probably say that if they allowed themselves time to think about it, that will be a distraction from just getting on with it and also ensuring their own safety and their own security.
One of the ways that the Archie character seemed to me to be echoing Kim Philby was also the way that he obviously he just enjoys the game, right? He enjoys deceiving people. He gets a kick out of the fact that that's how he's operating in the way that he's operating. So yeah, I mean, why take too much time to kind of keep going over the ground about why he's doing it when he's having so much fun doing it?
Yeah, I think there are times when kind of probably regretted it, but he's obviously quite good at it. I mean, I think that's the thing about quite a lot of, if he wasn't good at it, he wouldn't have survived that long. And if you do survive that long, then you're going to get a certain kick out of knowing what you're doing. There must be a point. I think, although people, I mean, I'm thinking aloud now, but although people, I remember reading something about the nature of gossip, and it's the fact that people, it reflects well on you if you have some information that people aren't privy to, which is why human beings by nature like to have gossip and spread it, because it kind of shows them in quite a good light or something. So no matter how gossipy or how voluble you are as a person, if there is a secret that you have that under no circumstances whatsoever can you let it out, or can you even allow people have the very, very slightest hint what your secret is, you probably get quite a lot of satisfaction from being able to absolutely shut that out of your life.
Absolutely. When at the beginning stages of the novel, when Cooper is sort of still innocent and still trying to be a writer, and he's wandering around Europe, I thought that was it felt to me like you're having quite a lot of fun with that, because it felt very authentically 1930s. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the 30s and why you, because obviously this is a departure for you, but why that seemed to you to be fertile grounds in which to set the novel?
Someone else asked me if that was a kind of a period that really interests me, or if I was trying to kind of echo other writers from that period. And it's my interest in the 30s is really from what was going on in the Soviet Union and the lead up to the Second World War. So I wouldn't pretend to be an expert or especially knowledgeable about what Europe was necessarily like, or socially, or whatever. I just, was trying to reflect the continent that had been like that then, that was on the verge of being disrupted in the most unimaginable way. So I think that's what I was trying to do. As far as kind of the having some fun with it, well, I think I was trying to get a little bit into the psyche of Cooper. And I think if you were a slightly innocent and naive 25-year-old, 26-year-old in 1936, you were probably a lot more naive and innocent and unworldly than you would be now, if you see what I mean. So
Yeah.
if you took a 25-year-old now who you think would be relatively unworldly, they actually wouldn't be that unworldly, would they? Certainly not compared to like it was then. And I just think that he's probably kind of quite a nice chap, probably quite friendly, a bit shy, not very much experience with women, as becomes evident in one particular escapade, and but probably kind of quite likable. People probably didn't have a big problem with him. But I think that also there are people like that aren't terribly noticed, and I think I wanted to be able to reflect that as well. I think that's kind of, when there are people around them and they don't notice an awful lot what they're doing. And I think that's what I was trying to get across with Cooper, because these things have got to happen to him. And if he was a very assertive and quite outspoken or very confident in his views, then that might not really work in terms of how he gets lulled into or drawn into the Soviet Union.
Yeah, because there's definitely a kind of contrasting paths for both of them, because both of them end up, in Soviet clutches, but one of them goes kind of willingly and one of them is kind of gulled.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite interesting. And I sort of wondered whether that was a kind of proxy for a kind of wider statement on people's kind of slide towards communism, because it seemed to me that's quite often the route, isn't it? You either go willingly, having thought about it a lot and decided that it's an ideology for you, or you're sort of, you slide into it backwards. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah. I think I suspect that if you asked a dozen people who were in that position, not necessarily who went as far as being spies of the Soviet Union, but were activists, if you like, active Communist Party members, I suspect that if you asked a lot of them, there would be a dozen different reasons, but it's how people got drawn into it. And I think that they were very good at finding, kind of spotting people. They did that quite well. So there might equally be other people that they would spot who would be unsuitable for various reasons. But yeah, I think broadly you're right, Antonia.
So both of them kind of so they come across some characters who are effectively working for Comintern, and these are the ones who go out looking for recruits. They're kind of, I guess, modelled on the great illegals of the 1930s, like Otto Deutsch, who famously recruited the Cambridge Five. They struck me as being very interestingly drawn characters, and at one point, one of them, finds out that maybe because they get because this is the end of the 30s, the purges catch up with them a little bit too.
Yeah, well, that was the thing about the purges, is that it was so all-encompassing, and no one could be sure that they wouldn't be drawn into it. And if you were if you were an activist in Moscow, you were kind of reasonably high up in the party, and you were working in ministry, you try and attach yourself to someone that was linked with the Central Committee or even with the Politburo. Imagine then what happens if you find out one morning that your boss was taken off overnight and that you're probably on the shortlist to go next. So I think the level of fear, absolute terror that there must have been during the Great Purge would have been unimaginable, because literally no one would have been safe.
No, well, I mean, some of the illegals who had been working quite happily for the Soviets were sort of murdered outside the confines of the Soviet Union, which I guess speaks to your earlier point about how you get out of that situation once you've put yourself in it.
Yeah, the
reach is long.
Well, I think they say that to Cooper at some stages, that don't imagine that we'll never. Don't imagine that you could have kind of escaped from us. We'll always find you, which of course they eventually do. And I think he's kind of aware of that. I mean, that certainly was the case. It was very, very well connected, and their tentacles spread everywhere.
In the meantime, Cooper, as you said, ends up connected with this slightly secretive branch of British intelligence called the Annex. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and what role they play in the novel and what they're based on? Because they are fictional, right? But they're
fictional. I mean, I usually try and use real organisations and real buildings. I try and be as factual as possible within the confines of fiction. But the annex isn't a real organisation. Interestingly, the book I'm writing at the moment, which is the follow-up to this, I came across an organisation which, had it not existed, I would have probably invented, and no one has heard of it. But it was called the Invasion Warning Subcommittee.
Right.
You ever heard of it?
No.
No one has, Antonia. The Invasion Warning Subcommittee existed at the old War Office building in Whitehall, in one of the basements, which has recently been taken over and converted into a luxury Raffles hotel, which I was able to go round and see where their offices were. But the Invasion Warning Subcommittee was working in 1939, 1940, precisely to be an intelligence body gathering information and intelligence about any German invasion of this country. So it was great to come across that and find that it was a real organisation. The annex I made up, and it was formed, according to the story, in the early 1930s, when there was a lot of rancour between MI5 and MI6 and Special Branch. And there was a feeling that there needed to be a body that would sort them out. And that was the annex. And it was called the annex because its headquarters were an annex to a transport ministry building I can't remember exactly which square it was, just behind the Swiss embassy, not far from Baker Street. And that's where they were. And then it evolved a bit, the annex, to do some tasks, if you like, for the British government or British intelligence that would be unreportable. So, carrying out, high-level intelligence that would that might be a little bit too sensitive for either MI5 or MI6. So that was the organisation that I set up, and then we see what happens to it early on in book 2.
Mm.
With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels on everything from lamps to ceiling fans, even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes, now available in crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox, clean feels good.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our U.S.-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
But obviously you don't have huge amounts of time for the NKVD, but I'm not sure you've got a huge amount of time for British intelligence either. They're quite Machiavellian too.
Well, I think the problem with MI6 in the 30s was their obsession, as with MI5, was with communists and was with Soviet intelligence and was with the Soviet Union, with the Russian spies. So they took their eye off the ball a bit, if you like, in terms of Nazi Germany. So they were never as serious about intelligence against Nazi Germany as they were against the Soviet Union. And there was a general thing within the Foreign Office that intelligence was a slightly ungentlemanly activity. So the British Embassy in Berlin was very hands-off as far as MI6 were concerned. So the MI6 operation in Berlin the front was the British Passport Office, and it wasn't in the embassy, it was in Tiergartenstrasse. And the guy who ran it, who was the MI6 head of station, didn't even have diplomatic status. So I think that, you could look at it and say, well, should they have known more about what the Nazis were up to in the German threat? There was very little. I mean, I've written about this before in the books. There was nothing really of any significance in the way of a British spy ring in Germany. So when the Second World War started, and obviously the embassy shut down and all British diplomats got out, there wasn't very much left. There were hardly any British spies remaining. There was nothing really to speak of, and it remained like that throughout the war. Now, you can think of all kind of good reasons why that might be the case, because there was obviously within occupied Europe, you had the resistance organisations, like in France, like in Belgium, where they would facilitate British intelligence, or in the case of France, you could fly spies in. They were landed by Lysanders. They would go ashore maybe through submarines, or you might drop them in by parachute. But if you think about it, Germany and Austria, that was not really going to happen. Spies would have been very isolated. It would have been very, very difficult, close to impossible for them to communicate with London. But there was very, very little there in terms of spies.
You said at the beginning, though, that the British intelligence was obsessed with the Soviet threat and the communist threat, but then it was slightly misdirected internally in Britain, wasn't it? I mean, because
as far as MI5 was concerned, I think their obsession was, if you look at it historically, the people that were recruiting at Cambridge. You talked about Joyce. There was also James Klugman, Deutsch rather. There was also James Klugman as well, who was recruiting. They were getting away with it. So I think the obsession was with Communist Party members at a relatively low level who were kind of active in industry. So, kind of communist shop stewards. So MI5 was quite good at compiling lists of people that sold the Daily Worker, or that were organising strikes at, factory in Bolton, that kind of thing. But these people were never really part of Soviet intelligence. They were part of the communist movement, if you like. But in terms of finding spies, that wasn't really the case. But I think they were obsessed, weren't they, with the idea of fellow travellers and Reds under the bed, and that kind of almost American-influenced approach. Whereas you could say that someone that was a very active shop steward and that was organising a strike was unlikely to be a Soviet spy, was too high, had too much of a profile to do it. So the people that were more likely to be Soviet spies, and it's kind of obvious looking back on it, would be ones that would have a very low profile, that wouldn't really have a history, if you like, or an obvious background for being a sympathiser for the Soviet Union. Some of them had flirted with it clearly at Cambridge, but had kind of long since left that behind them.
Well, and also Deutsch, the recruiter, obviously told the Cambridge Five to pretend not to be communists, because then they can fly under the radar. And the same happens with your Archie, that he very deliberately kind of covers his traces, and so they have a kind of double protection, don't they? One from not being on the communist radar at all, and two, being very people like us.
Yeah, very much so.
So Archie is, aristocratic. You even have him looking a bit like the king.
Yeah.
Or the abdicated king, which I thought was kind of sweet, that he's so aristocratic that he basically looks like a Windsor.
Yeah. Or, of course, they don't regard, the aristocrats didn't really regard the Windsors as one of them, did they? They don't really regard them as aristocrats, I don't think.
No, that's true. Can I ask kind of about the technical challenges of writing a 4-book series with a very sort of not elaborate's the wrong word, with a kind of mystery at the heart of it that you've got to keep on top of as a writer? How far do you plan ahead? How far are you are you a pantser or a planner? How does it work?
Elaborate's a very good word. It's architect or gardener, isn't it? Or I think is the current one, which I was asked at a book festival recently. And by nature, I'm a gardener. I kind of like it to evolve as I go along. If you're writing a 4-book series with fairly intricate plots, with kind of characters that you've got to keep going and remember what's happening to them, you have to have a degree of planning. So when I'm writing on my computer, I've always got the previous book open. So it's one of the documents there. So I'm constantly having to refer back to it. And then I've also got notes. I was making one just before about what's happening in future books, because the nightmare is that you do something in halfway through book 1 that you think is a bit clever. And then halfway through book 3, you think, why on earth did I do it? But it's too late because it's there on the shelf in front of you, smiling at you. So you've got to be careful about who you kill and when you kill them. And you don't want to be in a position where you've potentially screwed up a plot or a plot line because of doing something that you thought might help an earlier part of the story. But I try and be, I plan to an extent, but I like to be very open about how I get it. So I think I plan in the way, a little bit like, without sounding too pretentious about it, I'm now going to sound pretentious, it's a bit like setting out on a journey. So say I'm driving from London to Edinburgh. So I know where I'm going. So I'm heading there, but I'm not sure exactly what route I'll take. And I'm not sure that, halfway along the A1, I might think, well, I'll kind of go off to have a look at Leeds for a bit or somewhere there. It's a little bit like that. And I think what I like to do is to have things that crop up literally as I'm writing them. I kind of go down there and then let it take me a bit in that direction. And what that sometimes does is it opens something up that you think is really quite good, but then you suddenly found that you've written another chapter and a half. And I'm at the stage in the second book at the moment where I think I'm about 85,000 words into it. And I aim for 110,000 words. So I'm getting to the point in the book where I've got to start thinking about making sure that I kind of come into land, so to speak, on time and not overshoot the runway. And you sometimes can do that a little bit by these subplots or the extra angles that you put in are all well and good, but you just got to pare them down a little bit at some stage. And
you've written a number of other series before this one. Are there any particular times where you're on book 4 and you have thought, oh my gosh, I killed that person in book 1 that I totally need now? What was I thinking? Has that happened, or have you largely been on top of the material?
Largely, I think I've been on top of it. I think in my first, the first series wasn't really a series. It's the Canelo, my publishers, when I signed my contract with them, they also bought the first 4 books. And they called them the Spy Masters series, rather like the podcast, but it was actually 4 separate books that kind of work as, retrospectively. But the first proper series I did was the Prince series, Prince of Spies, and there were 4 books there. And I think I would, on reflection, have done 1 or 2 things differently. There were 1 or 2 characters that I let go, if you like, and I kind of got quite a lot of feedback from readers that readers don't like things to be ends to be left undone, if you know what I mean. And there were a couple of characters that just didn't really follow up, and that was partially because I felt, well, that happens in real life. Sometimes people just disappear, or and I should have tied all those up. So I've had people say, what happened to X, or why did we not find out what happened to Y? So there was some of that, but not in terms of the plot, where I got to the end and felt, oh God, what have I done?
Talking about loose ends in real life, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, as every spy writer does, but have you had any, did you ever get the tap on the shoulder yourself? Have you ever had any...
No. And in one interview I gave years ago, I can't remember who it was with, but I was asked something about, had I been a spy? And I think it came across as, Alex refuses to answer the question. And that kind of came, and I regretted that because I was a BBC journalist. And, I think that the idea that, as a BBC journalist, you might also have been a spy is wrong. I mean, journalists are constantly getting into trouble abroad, or being suspected. I mean, it's not unusual for journalists to be arrested and they say, oh, they're a British spy and whatever. So I think I should have been much more unequivocal in the fact that, no, I've not been a spy. I don't think I'm spy material, to be honest with you. I'm not sure.
What's spy material and why are you not it?
I sometimes wonder how good I'd be at being discreet. I think going back to that thing about gossip, I don't know, actually. I mean, maybe it will be kind of so enormous, the fact that, you are a spy, and if it kind of gets out, that's it, really, you're done for. So I don't really know, but I just don't think of myself as being. I mean, I'm quite good. I suppose being a journalist has quite a lot of similarities with being a spy. You know, you have to gather the facts. You've got to be innately curious as a journalist. You've also got to be quite good with people. You know, be able to. It's one of the skills that you have is to be able to get people to talk at times when they're not necessarily willing to do so. You also have to get people to talk about things that they might not want to. So you've got to be naturally kind of quite friendly and chummy with people. So I think I've kind of got those skills. I think most journalists would have. So I don't know really. You know, I kind of say, but no, I've never had any contact.
I think though you're right. The vast majorities of journalists I've ever met have been vanishingly indiscreet. So I can't. Maybe that's the thing that's the critical. But
you see, there is something about being indiscreet. Is if someone is a bit gossipy, you know, if you think about a friend, maybe who's kind of quite gossipy and who's a bit indiscreet, and every time you meet up for a drink, they say to you, "I've got to tell you this, by the way," then you'll think of them as the kind of person that would never be able to keep a secret. But being a spy is such a big secret that might be quite a good cover. So if you think of person X as someone who's very indiscreet, you know, couldn't keep a secret or anything, you tell them in confidence and you know that they're going to tell someone else in confidence what you've told them. You just assume that they would never be a spy. But it's so big, isn't it, being a spy?
That's true. I mean, that's Guy Burgess right there, isn't it? I mean, garrulous, flamboyant, tells everybody everything, utterly indiscreet about everything he does, and yet he managed to get away with it for years. So I suppose, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, in Burgess's case, I mean, he got away with it, you know, in circumstances where he perhaps shouldn't have done. McLean was probably a better example, you know, of someone who was just absolutely, you know, never let on or something like that. But
I'm really looking forward to see how Archie develops, because that tension of sort of holding a double life, and as you're saying, it's going from 1936 to 1956. The tension of holding a kind of managing to keep that double life going for 20 years is going to be an extraordinary thing to watch unfolding over the course of the 4 books.
I'm literally this afternoon in the middle of Archie's in Rotterdam at the moment in 1940. So Archie kind of gets away from Broadway in London, which was the headquarters of MI6, and gets out. So he's being tested in the field, and I quite like that part of him as well.
Well, I will look forward to that immensely. And in the meantime, I would urge everybody to read the first instalment and follow the adventures of Archie and Cooper. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Alex.
That's a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank
you for listening. Don't forget to follow us, to subscribe, to tell your friends. Be as indiscreet as you can. And join us next time on Spy Masters.